Good morning, everyone. You're very welcome to this morning's session on understanding and reducing electricity usage. This session is brought to you by the Green Arts Initiative in Ireland, which is run by Catríona Fallon and Theatre Forum with support from Creative Carbon Scotland. We have a series of resources, videos and events on our website. I'll share the link to that shortly in the chat, and they're open to absolutely everybody. And we also have two capacity building projects supported by the Arts Council, one which we've just completed on greening art centres, and there's a full report on that which I'll also share with you, and one forthcoming one on greener touring which we're about to kick off very soon, and we'll also share more information on that with you shortly as well. And in the meantime, just to let you know, we are recording the meeting, so if you could keep on mute, that will be great. And I'm just going to hand over now to Catríona.
Great, thanks a million for that welcome, Irma. I'm just going to share my screen, so just give me one moment now. Okay, so first of all, welcome to everybody, and thank you very much for joining us this morning. We just thought this would be a useful topic to do with people working within the art sector. It's very informal, and we're hoping that we might get some questions from you in the course of the session. It has to be said that it's not the most exciting of topics, so I hope you'll bear with me, particularly I think the bit that I'm doing around bills and so on. So bear with me in terms of content. It certainly won't win any Oscars for PowerPoint presentations. But basically, let's shine a light on understanding and reducing electricity usage. So I suppose energy is such a huge topic at the moment, and electricity in particular is never far from the page. The news at the moment, and I suppose we're very conscious that rising energy prices are very worrying and stressful for anyone running a business, including arts organisations, but also from a domestic point of view. And part of the stress comes from that uncertainty over ongoing price rises, but also the lack of control we feel we have over the rising costs. So the Green Arts Initiative is driven largely by a desire to reduce our environmental impacts, particularly our carbon footprint. But obviously, if we're reducing the emissions associated with energy, we'll also reduce our costs. And finally, the whole issue of supply and pressure on the grid and the electricity network to supply our needs is another concern as we head into darker evenings. And we all have a role to play in addressing that. So if we want to reduce our usage, I believe really strongly that we need to understand it. And I think it's really important that we know how to read an electricity bill, dull and all as it might be, and I suppose use the information that you find in those bills to record and analyse your usage. So that old adage, you can't manage what you don't measure, is really very pertinent to energy. And we all need that baseline energy data. So once we have that baseline data, that can inspire us to reduce our usage. So the purpose of the session today is really to give you some basic information, which will help you to better understand all of that and help you to reduce it in the future. So basically, I'm going to look at how to read and understand your electricity bill and why that's important, how to record and analyse your electricity usage, what matters. What does analysing your bills tell you about your electricity usage? And then we're joined by Nick Anton, the technical manager from Dunamaise, who was probably the first person in the art sector really to start looking at this whole area and energy reduction. He's a wealth of experience, and he's going to share some of that with us. And later on, we're going to be joined by Ruth Buggy, who's the Sustainable Energy Communities Programme Manager at the SEAI, extremely busy woman, but we're delighted that she could make time for us, and she'll be here towards the end of the hour. And then we'll have time for questions and answers. And if there's anything that crops up in the course, do really feel free to put in the chat. Even if you feel, sometimes people feel it's a bit of a foolish question, I don't want to ask it, please do. There are no foolish questions. So I'm going to begin with just looking at an electricity bill. This is Electric Ireland. Everybody's supplier will roughly have the same information on your bills, but Electric Ireland is probably a good example to use. It's actually one of the clearer ones if you get your electricity from a supplier like Bord Gáis. God love you, because that's a really hard one to read. I've been through a lot of them at this stage. So obviously it has this essential information on the main page about your bill, the amount that's due, how it was paid, and so on. And if I can, it's not moving for now, 1 second. Okay. And up in the top right-hand corner, You've got the account number, and further down on the right hand, you have the MPRN. That's a really important number. That's a unique identifier number that's linked to your electricity account, and that's where the electricity is being measured. You'll usually only have one MPRN, but you might be an organization that has more than one premises, in which case you'll have two MPRNs, two bills. You might even have two MPRNs in one building if you've expanded into it. That's quite costly, so it's worth thinking about if you need 2 meters, because you're paying standing charges and PSO levies for both. Also on the front of that bill, you will get information like whether your meter was read. That's really critical, because the information in your bill is really only accurate if your meter was read. If it's an estimate, that information is going to be less accurate. And the more often that the meter is read, the better. So I would suggest, if you don't do it already, that you submit a reading to your electricity supplier at least once a month, maybe towards the end of the month. The 20th of the month is a good time to do it, to make sure that you really have accurate information. Now, obviously, the smart meters are coming in. Many of you will already have smart meters in your homes, but I understand that smart meters being rolled out to businesses is going to take a little bit longer. So in the interim, really critical to submit that reading to your supplier. And also on this bill, we have a note there that the PSO levy is due to decrease from October 2019. So the PSO levy is something we're going to come back to, because it's quite an important part of the overall bill. This is the second page of that bill, and this is where most of us, your heart kind of quails looking at that. Certainly when I started looking at bills and I came to this section, I kind of thought, my goodness, there's so much information and detail on it. So I'm just going to point out the key bits that you need to look at. So one would be the whole question as to whether your bill is actual, estimated, and so on. And further down on the page, you'll see it'll, opposite each reading, it'll tell you whether it's an actual reading. In this instance, the customer had changed supplier, so the P is for price change as the new supplier came in. Most critically of all are these figures here. So the unit usage, you have a day rate. If you have a 24-hour tariff, well then you'll have a consistent rate throughout your whole bill, which a lot of people, and all of the venues, nearly all of the venues we looked at in the Greening Venues pilot project, they all had night meters bar one, though none of them knew why. So it's just an interesting to look at that. It's very useful to separate out how much electricity you're using at night from how much electricity you're using during the day, because if it's more than 10%, that really raised the question as to what is happening at night, what is driving that electricity usage. There's also an issue here with wattless electricity. So this, in this particular venue, they had a wattless issue, excess wattless issue. That doesn't crop up in many bills, but where it does, if that is more than, say, 30 euros per bill, it's certainly worth looking at, because the system doesn't like it. It's where there's this uneven stream of our current that's being demanded of the grid. It tends to penalise you then for that. And a small piece of corrective equipment can be installed to eliminate that and get rid of those costs. And they say roughly a 4 or 5 year payback. So if that's on your bill, talk to an experienced electrical contractor and ask them, can they remedy that for you? So down to the actual standard charges. So one of the key parts, and the part that took me a long time to come to terms with, is maximum import capacity. Every business will have a maximum import capacity allowance. So basically what that means, and not to bore the trousers off everybody, but basically what that means is that each business, each premises has a certain allocation in terms of the amount of electricity that it needs to draw down from the grid. And your maximum import capacity allowance is the maximum that you'll be allowed to draw down at any one time. You can potentially draw beyond that, but they will really penalise you for it. But what happens in a lot of instances is that allowance was set very high and businesses don't use it. So in this example, you can see that they had an allowance of 100, it's measured in kVA. I'm not going to go into details on that, but it's measured in kVA, and you pay for every day for every unit. And I'm just going to move my face out of the way here. So in this case, this company was paying almost 400 euros. And remember, VAT is going to go in on top of that. And unusually, because it's an Electric Ireland bill, they can see what the maximum kVA they hit was, and that was only 43. So it's a cost, it's a charge in your bill that you may not need. It is possible to reduce your MIC, your maximum import capacity allowance. It's not something you should do without talking to an experienced electrical contractor. There's a charge associated with doing that, though it's not massive, it's a few €100, and you can't change it more than once in every 2 years, as far as I know. But for some businesses, it really would make sense, and you'll see why, because it's also linked to your PSO levy. So again, your PSO levy, we'll go into that in a bit more detail. Everybody has to pay a PSO levy, domestic, business, and most theatres, because their electricity use is above a certain level, will be paying that PSO per kVA. And because it has that high maximum import capacity, guess what? It's a double whammy. So they're paying €264 of a PSO levy. Or this was back in 2018. Now this had the picture for PSO levy has changed, but just it's worth understanding when you're looking at your bill how the PSO levy is calculated. It's a set rate for domestic, it's a set rate for businesses under 30 kVA, but everybody over 30 kVA, you are paying per kVA for your PSO levy. So it can really amount up. So just a little bit more about what the PSO levy is. You probably are familiar with it. It's the Public Service Obligation Levy. And it was the government set it up, I think, probably back in 2010. And initially it was it says here, to support national policy objectives related to renewable energy, indigenous fuels such as peat, God help us. So if you may already know this, but the fuel with the highest density of carbon is peat, it's turf. It's higher than coal, it's higher than oil, it's higher than gas. So it's if you're going to burn a fuel, and I've burnt it, if you're going to burn fuel, it is the highest density of carbon. It's the worst thing that you can burn. But obviously we were using it to create electricity. But what it's generally used for now is to support renewable energy electricity generation. So for example, wind farms. So when wind farms want to invest in the Irish market, but they need a guarantee that they're going to be paid a certain amount, massive investment. The state wants to encourage that. So the state gives them a guarantee that they'll be paid a certain rate per kilowatt that they produce for 10 to 15 years. And when the market dips below that rate, the government steps in with that PSO levy and subsidises those generators. So that's where it came from. And it's calculated every year, usually in October, by the Commission for Regulation of Utilities for the following year. And we're going to come back to that again. But anyway, just to see that cost, and just a really rough idea, I just estimated if that maximum import capacity allowance for that venue was dropped to 70 kVA, they would save over €1,300 a year. And that was in 2018. As I say, things have changed slightly since then. But just to show you the impact. So these are, I suppose, parts of your bill that you may not be familiar with, and that's why I'm going into a bit of detail on them. So, I mean, if you want just a simple way of working out how many kilowatts you've used in a calendar year, you can just get the January bill for 2019. For example, if you wanted to calculate it for 2019, your January bill for 2020, note where it says the previous reading in each bill, deduct the 2019 total from the 2020 total, and that's your total units for the year. It's very, very straightforward. Obviously, if you've days, every year, the SEAI calculates the CO2, the carbon density of our electricity. Now, it actually fell off last year because we didn't have as much wind. It was less carbon intensive in 2020, good year for wind, bad year for wind last year, not a great year this year, but that's how it depends on the amount of renewable energy that's going into the grid to affect what the carbon density of it is. But I would suggest that you do something a little bit more complicated. It'll just take maybe an hour to set this up, but well worth it. That you set up a spreadsheet where you're going to analyze your electricity usage for as long as you like, over as many years as you like, and you can compare it. So the information that would be useful in that regard would be the period that you're covering, the number of days that the bill is for, kilowatts, daytime, nighttime, total, whether the reading was actual or estimated, because that does have a real bearing on the information that you're being given, cost for the day rate, cost for the night rate, if you have it, and then what the total costs were for that particular billing period for day and night. Your standing charges, I should have said, obviously every bill has a standing charge. Those charges tend not to fluctuate in the way that your PSO levy will, or that your prices will. You'll have a column for your PSO levy, any other additional charges. Winter demand is something you often see in a bill. And that's where the particular tariff that you're on is just charging you a bit more for electricity during the winter, but might give you a better rate during the summer. Your service capacity charges, that's where you're paying for your MIC allowance. Your electricity tax, sometimes that's included as a small little sum. Wattless charges, if you have them, and the total bill. So that will look something like this, which looks a bit scary, but in fact, it's very straightforward. And what you want is somebody in your organization who is prepared each month when the bill comes in. Ideally, this would be your finance officer if they were prepared to do it. And some people do this. We've worked with venues who are already doing this, and that you're putting this information into a spreadsheet. And that might seem like a lot of work, but really month by month, it's not a lot. And why is that level of detail useful? So in terms of what that can tell you, if we look, for example, at this particular venue that we're giving as an example, these are the total amounts they paid for electricity in 2018 and 2019. So roughly a difference of roughly €2,000. So if you're looking at those figures, maybe in a second, at your at the total figures at the end, but it's actually not what happened. So in fact, when you look at the kilowatt usage, you'll see that even though the total expended on electricity had dropped by almost €2,000, the usage had actually increased. So when 2019 consumption was compared with 2018, there was actually an increase of 5,500 kilowatts almost. That's enough for an average Irish household, you know, with 4 or 5 people in it. So just be wary of looking at the total that you've paid for your bill, total you've spent on electricity in any given year, and deducing from that you've used less or more electricity, because it's not always going to correspond. This year is a very good example. People will be paying a lot more for their electricity, but the chances are that they're really trying to reduce it. So it's not going to give you the information you need in terms of actual usage. In fact, where the reduction was coming from was in fact the PSO levy. So the PSO levy dropped significantly from it went from 364 in 2018 to 264 in 2019. And at the moment it's 163. And actually from October, it's going to be 0. So that all boils down to the fact that that all boils down to the fact that we're in this really unusual position with the price for electricity, and the fact that the state doesn't need to step in and support those energy generators because the return is so good on the wholesale market. That's just a rough, again, if you have those figures, you can create a pie chart. You can see that for this venue, a little over half, only half of their expenditure on electricity was for the actual electricity. The rest of it was for PSO levy, demand charges, standing charges, and particularly for the MIC. And that reduced a little bit in the second year. So the proportion spent on electricity that was actually for the electricity itself increased, and the other elements dropped. So just another thing about the PSO levy is that it has reached that very unusual, it's unprecedented because of the wholesale electricity prices. We're now in a minus situation. And that means that not only will we not be paying a PSO levy, but as of next year, we'll actually be getting money back under the PSO. So if you're the bigger user you are, the bigger, ironically, the bigger maximum import capacity allowance you have, the more you will be getting back through this system. So that's maybe one small light at the end of the tunnel. So what can we learn from our bills? I suppose one thing is night rate. If your night rate is more than 10% of your electricity, if you're using more than 10% of it at night, why? Obviously, there are things like servers, emergency lighting, and there are some things that have to be left on. But people will always say to me that they don't leave things on standby, and then I go into their premises and I find screens, monitors. Sometimes people have to leave computers on, but ideally you should be able to turn them off. Photocopiers, printers, all of that. It's still very common to see those left on. So that's one big thing. Look at the patterns of your usage. Are you using a lot of electricity in the summer, more than you would expect? Is something driving that usage in the summer when you would expect your electricity to be lower? And then compare years, compare one year with another. If you have that information, you can say, isn't that strange? We use more electricity, much more electricity in February this year than we did last year. What happened? And then once you have that baseline energy usage, you can share it. Really, it's great to share that information with the people you work with, because it's very inspiring way of saying, look, this is what we're using. What can we do? Let's set a target, 5%, 10% to really reduce that usage. And just in terms, I suppose, of quick wins, be ruthless about turning off equipment not in use. No standby usage, use a power strip with switches to turn everything off. Turn off lights when not in use, if it's safe to do so. Again, I often go into theatre buildings where the lights are on at times when really that there is sufficient natural light for everybody's needs. Obviously, bearing in mind any health and safety concerns. If you haven't already done so, convert your lighting to LED. These are things that you all know. But even if you have CFL, swap out the CFL for LED. There is still a significant saving, particularly now with the higher prices. Consider sensor lighting. That's a fantastic way to save energy with lighting. Stairwells, storerooms, toilets, even dressing rooms, corridors. Sensor lighting is a really a good approach to take. And then come together as an organization. If you bring people on board, if you all come together and walk through your building and see what ways you can reduce electricity usage. And look into the possibility of installing PV panels. And that's obviously not an option for everybody for a whole load of reasons. You have a building that won't take them, you don't have the funds, but maybe it's something that you could organize a fundraiser around. And there is new funding coming on stream later this year that should support you to do that. The end, with apologies for the dull contents. That's it from me, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to hand over now to Nick. Nick Anton is the technical manager with Dunamaise in Portlaoise. As I said earlier, just a man with a huge amount of experience when it comes to looking at energy and energy reduction. And he's been exercised about this for, I could probably say, decades, Nick. But he's going to share some of his experiences and the work that he's been doing in Dunamaise. Thanks a million, Nick.
Thanks, Catríona. Yeah, can you all hear me? So I didn't find that boring at all. I'm one of the sad people that finds energy bills quite an interesting subject. Now I did it very slightly differently. I didn't look at any of this really in terms of the bottom line financially. I went at the whole thing just from energy use, much to the annoyance of managers and board, because they were saying, how much does that actually save us? And I was going, well, it's saving us 40,000 kilowatts, but what's that in money? And I was going, I don't know, but it's saving 40,000 kilowatts. So I was very much from that kind of mechanical point of view of it. The one thing I would say about the reading the bills and reading your meter is you have to be careful, because a lot of the meters have a multiplier on them. So what you actually read on your meter might say, once you do the sums, you'll end up with 1 kilowatt. But you actually have to multiply that by 60 or 50 or whatever your meter is set at. So, but your supplier will be able to tell you that. And there's actually very good how-to guides on ESB Network's own website. So if you just Google reading your meter and go to the ESB Networks one, that it shows you almost all of the standard industrial and domestic meters and tells you how to read them. And it also gives you sorry, I had COVID in the last couple of weeks and my brain has just gone barp. It also gives you some very easy to read pictures of what the screens will say at the time. An odd thing about when the ESB come in to read your meter is they read the historic reading as opposed to the current reading. So that confused me for a while, because I was then giving in the current reading for my, when they didn't come to read it, I was putting in the current reading into the website, and all of a sudden our bill would jump because we were effectively paying 2 months of electricity at the same time. So just, if you are submitting your own readings, check it off of whatever your last read bill was, to make sure that you're not putting in current as opposed to historic, or vice versa, because one of the months you'll end up getting either no bill or a double whammy. So what we did in Dunamaise, I've been doing this since around about 2009, and I started off. I'm going to share some stuff here. going to share this one. So I started off with, oh, that's the wrong one. Where am I? Sorry, folks, this one. So this is my master energy usage sheet. So the sheet itself started in 2010 because I was doing all of this off the bill in the first place. And to begin with, more or less every week, I recorded what we were using in the way of electricity, what we were using in the way of water, and at that time it was oil central heating. And that was just really to give me a bit of an overview of the weekly use. I was then putting that against how many shows and how many get-ins, just to get a rough idea of how long the building was open. But after a few years, I streamlined it down to just a monthly reading. After quite a few years, we got to something nice and tidy like this. So I've basically got my my day reading, my night reading. Do you know what? I'm going to take you to this one because it's simpler. We changed our meter in 2018. So we had a night reading first, and then a day reading, and then the cumulative. So that figure there is actually the rate before plus the other rate minus the other rate minus the other rate multiplied by 60. And that gives me what my kilowatt hours were for any particular month. And then we have our watt list there, and then we have what the cafe used. So I got a small meter installed specifically for what was happening in the kitchens, and that cost around about £400 euro at the time, but it's been invaluable just even for passing back the costs to the cafe, and just to keep an eye on what they're using every week. Now that only does the actual equipment in the kitchens, so the lighting, all of the domestics in the toilets and the cafe itself and the foyer, we just kind of put a bit of a random charge on that. So we did the same thing with water, and water is a big one because water charges are expensive for organisations like us. We started off, I think we were at one point we were using we were using 3 tons of water a month. No, 300 tons of water a month, and we got that to 70. And it was basically just leaks in toilets and urinals. So sensors, just like with lighting sensors on particularly urinals, because they just fill and flush all day long. So if you can fit sensors like them, they're a couple of £100, and they pay for themselves in less than a year. They're easy to fit as well if you have any plumbing skills. And then gas, but we won't get into gas just now because everybody's heating is different. But in terms of electricity, then, so what we did in terms of reduction was we started off by doing zero cost reductions. So in the building we had 134 fluorescent tubes. That was 5 foots. We had 140 PL downlighters, which were dual CFLs, and various other fittings here, there, and everywhere around the building, 2Ds and all of the usual stuff you'd see, E14s in the dressing rooms. That was the dressing room lights, 96 lamps in the dressing rooms. So what we did was we took every second one out. So we went from, in rooms like this room, there are actually 3 twin fluorescents. Why? I have no idea. So I just took, I decommissioned one of them and took a bulb out of each of the others, cutting the cost from 6 lamps burning all the time to 2 lamps burning. So that was the first step. We did that, and in terms of the water usage, what we did was we just leak checked everything. So we turned everything off that we thought we could turn off, and took a meter reading, and then came back the following morning and took another meter reading to see if there was any discrepancy. The first thing we did to save water was to put a water bottle into all of the urinals, saving 500 or 750 mil on each flush. There are technical ways of doing that. You can upgrade your cisterns. You can buy, I think they're called elephant bags or something that you put into your system. But a water bottle or a brick in a polythene bag does exactly the same thing. So what the first big investment that we made, once I'd gone through all of the readings, and once I'd seen, analysed what our usage was and how much of it was the domestic and how much of it was on the stage, we decided that the stage could wait and we would deal with all the domestic fittings in the building. So we got some funding through the department actually to change out all of the CFLs for LEDs. We did this back in 2015. Yeah. So this was the spreadsheet that I was working on then. So basically, I had the units. I had I'm calling the units are the instruments. I had the bulbs, the lamps, whatever. What their current wattage was, what the proposed wattage would be with the LEDs, which has actually got less now, but this was the 2015 figures because the LEDs have got more efficient as well. So we had what the wattage was at the moment, what the wattage would be after the change, and what the saving was in watts. And just to make things easier today, what I did was I put these figures into actual figures. So this 10,081 represents how much money we would save today by doing that change now, if that makes sense. What we saved back in 2015 was 4,900 a year, but what we would save now, because the electricity unit price is over 10,000 a year, by changing to the LEDs. Now, from my best recollection, changing all the units cost us just under 10,000 quid. So the payback at the time was just around 2.5 years, but the payback now the units are probably, well, there's a bit of a balance here because a lot of them have actually got cheaper. So you're probably looking at in around the 10 to 15,000. Now we did it on a very cheap basis because we weren't renewing any wiring or changing any wiring. So we did all of the work ourselves, myself and the other technician, because we were changing like for like. And then all we did was we got an electrician in to have a look at it. Now you can't do that with emergencies. The emergencies have to be done by an electrician. But if you're not actually changing anything, technically you can just do it yourself. So we did it piecemeal. We did it over a period of about 8 weeks. We took an area, changed everything out. The room was absolutely full of stock. So that was the first big investment, 10,000, and the savings were immediate. The next thing we looked at was doors and the windows. So we had glass doors, and you'll probably all know these glass doors. They sit quite nicely, but once you measure round the outside of the door, we realised that we had an A3 sheet of paper effectively as a window all day. So the gap around those very beautiful glass foyer doors was equivalent to an A3 that was just letting cold air and letting warm air all day. So changing them to wooden doors that actually sealed made a huge difference. And it was the same thing with windows. Our windows were never great. They were all double glazed, obviously, but the mechanisms on the window meant that you could leave the window fully open. So we changed them all for windows that only open at the top, only open a little bit. The next thing that we did was we put insulation on the exposed plant on the roof, and again we got SEAI funding for that. So that was through the Better Energies, the Better Energy Communities project with SEAI. So we were partnered with a commercial business, and you sort of get points. So whatever your plan is and however much your savings are worked out in points, and then with the commercial industry that you're partnered with, they have points as well, and if it all adds up well, then the funding comes from SEAI, and if it doesn't, you have to look at other ways of saving energy. The one caveat I would have with SEAI is that they only look at the bottom line savings. They don't look at things like waste and replacement costs and so on, which was a massive bugbear to me, because as we changed to LED, it meant that we were putting far less into landfill or recycling. I'm going to say landfill though, because I don't believe a lot of that stuff was recycled, because it's far too expensive to be recycled, particularly CFLs. Because of the mercury that's in them, it's prohibitively expensive. So while we put them into separate things in the recycling out at the facility, I think some of it just gets crushed and buried. However, I have no proof of that. It's just always been a feeling. But all of that, all of those lamps that were going into the bin or going into the recycling, they aren't taken into account, and neither are any of the man hours for all of the changing of lamps around the building. So if you are doing stuff for SEAI, it's very good to have that information there, just even for your board and for yourselves to know what you're saving in terms of landfill, know what you're saving in terms of man hours, but it doesn't really matter to your SEAI figures. So when we were working with Phil Walker, well, we still are, but this gives you a wee bit of an overview of what our savings were. So we had the lighting investment from the department. So these are based on this is the savings after the investment. So up until 2019, which is the last figure we have, effectively we'd saved 34,000 on our electricity, on our power usage. So this is electricity, heating, and water.
I want the same sheet, Nick.
Seen cumulative.
It has the date 2020. It looks like watts rather than money, but I could be wrong.
Oh, you hang on. Maybe I'm sharing the wrong one. Hang on, I'll
Sorry,
just
no.
share this one. This one. Cumulative net savings.
Yes, that's it.
Okay, so these are the various investments. So we invested in the doors, we put in a new boiler. These two lighting investments here are actually theatre lighting investments, but this was the biggie. This was the domestic. So, so it shows up that we were saving around about 2.8 on the initial thing of that investment. And as we go through, you can see that all of these things are dipping us down, particularly the boiler, because that was a 60,000 quid investment, but it started to pay back almost immediately until we get to this point where we're on 34,000 net savings in energy. So I'm going to have to do. I'm not great on these Zoom things, so I'm going out and I'm going back in again, folks. So we've got, I just need to see which one this is. So this is our initial usage. I think you're seeing this one here with the annual tons that I'm highlighting. We've got 140 tons of CO2 is where our starting point was back in 2009. And the way that we have been calculating it is it's been by turnover, so it's CO2 per euro, by activity, so that's shows and workshops, by employee, and just in general. So as you can see, we started to come down. So these first few years were all cost negative. They cost us nothing to start doing these reductions. It was all taking out light bulbs, sorting out when the heating was on, when the heating was off. The only thing it did cost us was we put in a couple of sensors for the lights in the toilets, but they're 35 quid each, you know, and they're easy to fit. You can get an electrician in to do it, or you can do it yourself. There are various different kinds. This is terrible. I'm going back out and back in again. So this brings us up to date. Where is it? So this one brings us up to date. So from that original 140 tons, we're down. 2020 is a bit odd because of it being 2020, but 2019 is a better notion. So we got down to 75 tons of CO2. This year's figures are showing that the activity is up, and it's shown that we're around about 60 tons. So we're still on the way down. But as you can see, per performance went a bit crazy because we had no performances. And it was the same with per employee. It kind of stalled as well because of the performances and sorry, that's the money. By employee was kind of strange as well because all the employees were at home, so it plummeted. So in short, the main thing to deal with is your domestic stuff. If you haven't already dealt with the domestic lighting in your building, do that first. The theatre lighting is around about 5%. The savings are huge, but they're very short-term savings. So per show you're saving like 30,000 watts, but that's an hour out of a year sort of thing. So the domestic in the building is where most of the cost comes from. What Catríona was saying as well about the night rate, you'll find, especially if you've got a cafe, that a lot of your night rate is coming from stuff that you just can't switch off. But all of the fridges, freezers, and so on and so forth, ice machines, although ice machines can be switched off and just used as required. But the computers are one of the biggest things. Cumulatively over the year, a computer and a screen that's running at around about 50 watts over 24 hours, 365 days a year adds up tremendously. I remember doing a calculation at one stage for changing the running men, you know, the emergency signs in a building, and it was coming up at around 70,000 watts, 70 kilowatts a year, running fluorescent running men, and that came down to around about 15 watts a year by changing them to LEDs. So there's those little things. The things that are on all the time are the things you want to change first, even although they're not necessarily massive draw. The trap is to fall into the big draw items, the floods, the power cans, the whatever. So when we went on through SEAI again to invest in the LED stage lighting, we did it in phases as well. So we've done 3 phases so far. We started off with floods and cans because they're the big ticket items. They're used for virtually every show, for all the gigs, for all the community shows. So changing down from the cyc lighting is the best example. We were using 24,000 watts on the cyc, and we've got that down to 900 watts. And then the power cans, again, you were taking a 1K unit down to 165 watts. And then we changed out to Fresnels and profiles, but it's massively expensive. The Fresnels are £2,000, £2,500 each. So you really have to think about what units you're going to buy and when is the time to buy them. And the time to buy them is after all your domestic is done. We all want to have, technicians all want to have the best toys, but it's not actually the answer for saving energy at the moment. If you have all your domestics done, go for it. Go for the stage light and stuff as well. But it's slightly more difficult to get the SEAI grants for lighting these days because the baseline on lighting now is LED. Back in the day, the baseline on lighting was either incandescent or fluorescent or CFL. But now they're pretty much gone, and certainly the incandescent will be gone in the next 5 years, and I would imagine that CFLs are going to become harder and harder to find. So because the baseline is LED, you need to really have another plan in place as well. So be that insulation, or be it changing the heating, or thermal valves on your radiators. Then you can get in some funding towards your LED stuff as well. But you won't be able just to go in. Now, I could be wrong, this could have changed again, but you won't be able just to go in and say, we want to change all of our lighting to LED, give us money.
This might be a good time actually to bring Ruth in, Nick, considering.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm kind of, I've covered everything, and as usual, I find questions are easier because my information is. Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't even see the note there about the 20.
You're fine, and look, that was fascinating. It's great to see. I mean, there can't be many venues that have a record that goes back to 2010, recording all of that detail. So it's absolutely fascinating.
And I'm always happy to share that with people as well, and you'll see where the changes happen, where the changes go.
Brilliant.
Okie doke.
So thanks a million, Nick. That was wonderful. We're going to invite Ruth now to join us. Ruth is, as you know, with the SEAI. She's responsible for the SEC, the Sustainable Energy Communities program there. And I think I'm going to ask maybe Irma just to make sure that Ruth can share her screen if she would like to. But I think the grants are gone for lighting, if I'm correct, but Ruth might be able to correct me on that.
Yeah, as I understand it, thanks indeed, Catríona. The lighting is gone for that. So I think at the moment the only grants that are available in the lighting space is kind of pitch lighting. So unless you're side by side or you're sharing a facility, there isn't any lighting grants. And I think it's down to partially the baseline is now assumed to be LED, but also the payback is less than a year. So typically measures that have such a short payback period don't typically require grants, because they will return their investment.
Yeah, the argument has kind of been made, basically, isn't that it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So Ruth, do you want to share some slides with us, or do you
Sure, absolutely, and great to see everyone this morning and delighted to be here, and thanks for the invitation. If you're okay, I'm going to share this screen. I'm on somebody else's computer, so I'm a little bit out of sorts. So if it's okay, when I try and make that into full presentation mode, it obscures everything else. So if you can see that okay with the orange slide, grant, I might keep it on this. So this is just our business and energy supports and grants that we have available, and really just following on from Nick's brilliant presentation. It's good to see somebody as nerdy about electricity bills as me. I do love looking into it. So we have a whole range of supports for businesses, and I appreciate the art sector typically falls into this, but in some cases, some facilities may not meet all of the requirements of all of the supports. But we do have a range of financial supports, training, networking opportunities, and expert advice. We do talk through the 5 steps of energy efficiency. So really the first one is understanding your energy use. And I think both Nick and Catríona covered that off really well in terms of if you don't know what you're using, it's very difficult to understand what choices you should make. Then looking to see how you can create an energy action plan by seeing where the energy is. You can see what the major users are, and they're the ones to go after. And very much like what Nick referred to, knowing that you have choices to retrofit aspects of your facility may come about when there's either other works happening. So typically there might be some re-roofing works happening, and you might be a good opportunity to consider insulation. You might be doing another electrical upgrade for other reasons, at which point changing the lighting might be a good one. Or even just having, if you're lucky enough to be able to do a direct swap in terms of bulbs, one for one CFL out for LED, that you have the replacements on hand, so you are timing them out appropriately and not making redundant, I suppose, bulbs that are good. So it's just having that plan in place, completing an energy audit, and we do have supports for that. Then looking at the opportunity to invest in energy efficiency upgrades and renewables. And really, it's a constant process of monitoring, tracking, and reporting for yourself, just to make sure you get that validation that the measures you've taken you're showing the improvements. And even Nick's breakdown, like CO2, and having the different, I suppose, metrics of how do you measure? Is it the people factor? Is it the number of performances? Is it the size of the building if you're getting an extension? Knowing what your different metrics are helps you make a decision and inform the choices that you're going to make. So really looking at understanding your energy use, we do have a free e-learning platform, and there's 24 modules on there. So there's a lot of different ways of going on, totally free, different interactive videos. Promise it's a real dip in and dip out as the topics are of interest to yourselves. And it typically shows a result in energy bills of up to 10% by showing you how to understand that bill and make the right choices. So it's there. It does an introduction to solar PV. It also gives an option for electric vehicles. And whilst lighting isn't an option there, EV chargers are available to community buildings to install. So it might be something of interest, given that you have people there for a certain amount of time using your facility. It's a nice amount of time to charge a car. But again, understanding who you want to use as a supplier so that they're able to bill the person using, and it doesn't increase your own energy use unnecessarily. Looking at that energy master plan. So we do have guides, and we have workshops available as well that can follow up with an energy advisor. So you can sign up there, and I'll share these slides with Catríona to share with yourselves. So SMEs, or what are called there's a term on them. Sorry, apologies there. There's a term in the scheme that businesses are eligible as long as they're non-obligated entities. So an obligated entity would be a local authority who's required to undertake audits for compliance with the public sector code. So if you're not a non-obligated party, there could be a challenge. So it's there. If your spend on energy is €10,000 per year, which very few of us will avoid not meeting this year, much to our disappointment, that is open. So there's a €2,000 voucher for you to select an energy auditor to come out and do a specific type of energy audit to guide you into that process. So you do have to have a valid CRO number and be tax compliant, and you can apply online. So there's a whole register there of people who can come out and do that energy audit for you. So again, this is helping you to guide you towards the decisions that you want to make as an organization. then just having a look at the opportunity to invest in energy efficiency upgrades. There is a support scheme for renewable heat if your building is appropriate for that type of option. So there's investment grant aid up to 30% for heat pumps. And then if you're looking at biomass boilers and biogas or high efficiency combined heat and power, there are supports there of a payment based on kilowatt hours that you would produce, also available. So again, it may suit some buildings, it may not suit others, but it is a support that is there. We do also have then the Better Energy Communities Grant that Nick spoke about. And yeah, it does have to be part of a wider project, but there is a list of registered project coordinators on our website. So if you have a project that you're interested in, it's just a case of sending an email outlining your project to see if any of the project coordinators can incorporate it into their project, and open that conversation with them, and then they can manage the aspects of the grant application, and they'll look after the admin side of things there. So that could be a useful option if you're moving forward. It does focus on energy efficiency, so thermal is more important, and there will be no supports for solar PV going forward. So that's gone now. Solar PV is no longer credited into the scheme because there are other supports in the market that I can cover. Also, if you are eligible for accelerated capital allowance, it is a good way of getting a tax incentive back to your service, but I don't think it'll apply to too many organizations here, so I'll skip on. So just looking at solar PV, there is a very good guide there for solar PV for business, talking you through the basics of what might work for yourselves. There are conditional planning exemptions there, so again, that might guide the type of installation you might consider. You are looking for a south-facing roof typically, so if you don't have a south-facing roof suitable for this, it's going to be less suitable to it. And then also understanding your time of day and when you're using power. So if most of your performances are evening performances, when the sun isn't going to be there and shining, it's not going to be a good load match. So it's just knowing that. And on that point, if you have a demand, an MIC, as Catríona covered, of 100 kVA, you are required to have a quarter-hour meter. So you can actually go to what's called the MRSO, so that the meter register of Ireland, so they're a subsection of ESB, and they'll actually give you your quarter-hourly data on your meter and the usage. So you can actually profile what is needed. So I'm just going to throw that on there. Does that show up for you guys that you can see information on an MRSO? So it's a really good way of getting a data file, looking at what your particular electricity usage is, and they will provide that at least once a year to you. But again, you have to have a certain capacity, so it has to be the 100 kVA load size or higher to be able to get that data, unless you have a meter that is able to take it as well. So it's just a way of understanding what your profile is and then being able to model what a solar PV might match. But it's also really good for trying to track what I've heard being referred to as vampire loads. So you think everything is off, but your meter's still running. So why do you have a load between 2 a.m. and 8 a.m. and sometimes it can be a broken fridge freezer and the seal isn't working and it's pulling constantly and cycling on continuously, and it's pulling a load that you wouldn't have expected. So it's really useful in that regard to track down unexpected loads. Or, you know, I think we've all had a colleague who likes to plug in a heater under their desk on occasion, and sometimes they get left on, or other loads are left on. People are charging equipment when they shouldn't be. So again, using all the data available to help inform that decision. So then we have, in addition to that, so there's a non-domestic solar grant to be announced very shortly, and it's 2,000 for, it's the same size as the domestic, so it's a maximum of €2,400 for up to 6 kilowatt peak. And it's there, and the tariff is set by the suppliers. So anything you don't use on that up to 6 kilowatt system can be exported to the grid, and there is a payment due to come in place. So from a very quick look, and it was literally, I went onto the supplier's website, and if I could find it within 2 clicks, I included them here. It's not to be unfair to any of the suppliers. I couldn't find what their tariff was. I moved on to the next supplier. So the export value that they're giving you for your electricity is ranging from 14 cent with electricity to 20 cent flow gas. And I did this about 2 weeks ago. And there's a tax exemption for up to €200 from that income that you would generate. But that's for domestic. I don't know if it applies to non-domestic installs. But that's really valuable in you understanding what you're paying to import and what you're getting if you're exporting, because a lot of people are seeing 27, 35 and 40 cents to pay for the electricity unit, and if you're getting less than half of that back, it makes so much more sense to size the system based on what your usage is, but also making sure that that usage happens when you're likely to see a solar gain, which may not be a good fit in this sector. So it's just understanding the pros and cons and what the likely payback is, and is it the right step? So we would always say, reduce your energy demand first before you look to put in renewables, and then with that you put in the smartest solution available to you. For larger systems, there isn't a grant for the installation, but there is what they're calling a clean export premium. So they're guaranteeing 13.5 cents per kilowatt hour for a number of years. It does reduce, but it's there for up to 15 years as an income for bigger systems. So if you have a large roof area and it's something that you're interested in, it could be very useful. So there's not much else there in terms of that. The other thing is we've 700 communities all across Ireland. So that's the program I do run. And I'd love to think that either you know about an SEC in your area, or if an SEC is in your area and they reach out to you, that you might consider participating in that community group, and they get funding to do energy master plans. So the same way as with the business side, helping you develop an energy master plan can be a really useful way of seeing what the opportunities are at a community level, and also at a building level. Then that was really it. Just to say as well that sustainable transport model and the opportunity to look at EV charging, if it's something that's of interest, it is reasonably new into the BEC grant. Is there anything, Catríona, that you want to?
No, that's wonderful. Maybe just one small point, and I do want to give people an opportunity to maybe to ask a few questions. With the up to 6 kilowatt PV, are there grants available for that?
Yeah, so it's €2,400. It's due to launch, I was told, August. So
we've been hearing that
deadline. It's
fingers crossed.
Yeah, very much so.
And maybe to say that I suppose some theatres and art centres would be quite busy during the day. Not all of them. You've got the classic theatre, which is busy at night, but you would have quite a few that might have cafes, even creches, would have a lot of activities. But you're absolutely right. At night time, really from sort of 7 to 10 would be the busiest time for most art centres. If they have galleries, then they actually use a lot of lighting, and they will be quite heavy in terms of electricity usage. But Anna, you wanted to ask. So I just wanted to first of all say thank you. That was
pleasure.
Really stop to her. Many thanks for that, Anna.
Thanks, Catríona. It's really about the community schemes, Ruth. We've many years ago, we were very enthusiastic about the notion of a community scheme. I think based on Catríona's experience at the time, and the geographic community schemes are very relevant to some people, but not to everybody. But a lot of art centres and arts organisations are organised in networks, and they would be communities of interest rather than geographic communities. And I think rather than lots of individual art centres working through their own, energy audit with an SEA voucher, and then working through their plan and working out everything themselves. Now, people do share information and they're very collegiate, but a community of interest of art centres and/or arts organisations, including galleries, would be a fantastic way for people to access all of the relevant information from one SEAI advisor, rather than 50, 60 people dealing with different, presenting the same problems and asking the same questions, but somehow to consolidate the expertise that is there. And for also people are organised in their own networks or communities of interest. So the sharing of information will be very easily facilitated through those networks, or creating a single community of interest for the sector.
Indeed, and it is something we've looked at, and we just have to balance, and whilst fully recognise communities of interest versus community of geographical shared location, because we look, I suppose, we kind of use a reference around the energy you use and the energy you influence. So I'm not against that grouping of art centres, but we would ask that it's more than just the art centres, that potentially you engage your staff and your suppliers into the process. So it's not just the energy used in the building, but it's your ability to influence a wider group, so that potentially your facility becomes a demonstration site for a particular technology or a particular retrofit, or you share the experience of getting the savings, and the work that you do would be something we can certainly consider. And that we very much in line with the likes of, Catríona and I met last week in Dingle around the West Kerry dairy farmers. So they're a cohort of farmers that are looking at opportunities within their common interest but they're also looking at their own homes, their transport, and the communities that they influence. So yes, with a little bit of a stretch, if that makes sense.
And I think that's really been our approach up to now with the Greening Arts Centre's initiative, is that it's really critical that you involve as many people in your staff team. It's not about 1 or 2 people in an organisation. It's very much about a whole shift in the sort of psyche of that organisation. And Nick, you had a question there and a couple of interesting posts in the chat as well.
Yeah, Ruth, I was just wondering, so you did mention pitch lighting. Did you mean pitch as in like a football pitch?
Outdoor GA pitch type
Yeah.
lighting, yes.
So what crossed my mind as you were chatting there was the actual theatre lighting is very, very similar to the pitch lighting. So it's high, currently high wattage, short-term usage, and very expensive. So it would be interesting whether SEAI could start looking at the model of theatre lighting in the same way as pitch lighting, and make that a specifically fundable thing for venues and music venues and so on around the country, because it is. I put in just a little sum there into the chat, but we're generally changing sort of a 1200 watt lamp for a 230, 165, somewhere in around that region, but the units cost are in excess of £2,000 each, and they might be on for an hour a day, and that might only be 3 days a week as well. So the payback, that's been our biggest bugbear. That's why I went with all the domestic easy to calculate stuff in the first place, because trying to actually come up with, and I had this with the better energy communities when we were doing the paperwork, and they're saying, how can the payback on that be 14 years? You know, the unit's going to be gone by then. But realistically, that's the sort of level you're looking at. And that's what puts it out of reach of an awful lot of venues. So
and I will certainly, and I completely agree with you in terms of the technical understanding of the two technologies. They're very similar. I think what's most important is the actual opportunity for the ongoing MIC to come down. Because if you don't have that surge, you're able to bring that down, and therefore you make savings on an ongoing basis as an organisation. So I think it's looking at both sides of that equation. So I'll certainly take it back to them for consideration. I think the blanket ban on lighting was seen as standard commercial ceiling lights. I don't think it was meant to be for specialised lighting.
Yeah, there's been a lot of controversy about that. It has been kind of banned, and then there's been derogations, but it is due to be phased out completely. So there will have to be some. I mean, a lot of venues would have maybe a certain up to maybe 10 LEDs. Some are up to 70%, but some have none. And it depends how busy. Some venues will be open 5, 6, even 7 nights a week, and they're the ones that are really using those lamps. Will you agree, Nick?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Oh God, there's something you just said there as well that struck me. Oh yeah, just on the MIC. If you've on most of the certainly the electronic and with the smart meters in your businesses, you'll find that it'll have a couple of different maximum demand readings on it as well. So they're worth keeping an eye on, because they'll give you a fair idea of where you're at. But the handy thing with most of them as well, it says it happened at 7 o'clock on Tuesday. So you can actually go, right, well, what happened at 7 o'clock on Tuesday that we got close to it, or that's what our maximum demand was. So that can be very useful and something to keep an eye out for.
Great.
Is everybody else I know is very quiet and shy, and but if you have any questions, if you want to put them in the chat, please do. And just while you're thinking about that, I might ask Ruth one more question. I mean, will it assist the state in terms of electricity provision if there's a better understanding of what the MIC might need to be? In other words, if an organisation can say, well, look, we've looked back, we've never reached anywhere near the MIC allowance that we have, can we reduce it? Would that be useful to the state then when they're trying to think of, you know, have we got enough electricity on the grid to manage that, or is it? It
is in terms of how they reinforce the grid. So there is kind of defaults that they assume, and people just kind of accept it usually when the building is being built, that the assumption is made, and then it's not adjusted down. So I think it does from their planning perspective, because if you want to increase it at a later date, they'll charge you a lot of money because they have to put in the reinforcement. So think about it carefully, and it's not a knee-jerk decision to make that.
No, exactly.
But it does help in terms of their calculations, but it would be quite marginal in the scheme of everything else. I think we did a SME energy training course back in 2012 to 2013 with the local authority, and allowed me the Enterprise Training Board, and they went into 32 audits, and in one particular facility the MIC saving amounted to €5,000 a year, and that was in 2012 prices. So, you know, just being on the wrong tariff amount can be hugely significant.
Sure. Yeah.
So it is definitely valuable. And I see somebody put in that they're getting looking at an opportunity. They're doing it with a partnership with the council, which is great to see. And you know, the council are great at doing a lot of these actions. It's just not a consistent model at the moment, which is a bit of a challenge to be able to say to everybody it's available.
Just 1 second, I realized I haven't plugged in my laptop.
If anybody else has anything else they wanted to add, I'm going to have to leave, unfortunately, for another meeting. But it's been great, and I really appreciate the opportunity to chat this morning. And as I said, I'll take the comments back to the BEC team and just see how they can do it. And I said, welcome the community of interest approach on the SEC side, and we can work with that.
And we'll come back to you through Catríona on that. Will we, Ruth?
Perfect.
Is that the
Yeah,
best
yeah.
way to do it? Great.
Yeah, that's perfect.
And
And look,
thanks a million, Ruth, because I do genuinely appreciate how busy you are. So that's
not at all.
here.
I'm in the office today, so it's great. But there may be, and there may be reasons why you might choose to be regional groups of arts facilities rather than trying to be fully national. It doesn't mean you can't coordinate, but there might be an economies of scale that just doesn't make it for yourselves when you're looking at what's available in the energy master plan and spend. But we can chat with Catríona to see what makes sense in that regard and work with yourselves. That we're flexible. It's just what makes most sense.
Brilliant.
Great. Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of the event. Take care.
Thank you. Sheila had a question there about the MIC. Probably somewhere on your bill does it say anything that has KVA on it? And it probably does mean that you're certainly not. Are you based in a theatre space, or is it an office space?
We're a converted church, but it's a theatre space. But there is 40 kVA. Our PSO levy is calculated on the basis of 40 kVA.
Yeah, so that's your MIC. It's
that's
40.
Our MIC. Okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
Which is kind of moderate, but might still be a bit high for. But see, the tricky thing I would say is it's very difficult to get that information when. So you know what your allowance is, but you don't know from your bills generally whether you get anywhere near that allowance. You actually have to go to ESB networks to get that information. Your individual supplier can't give it to you. So there's a little bit of legwork to be done, but I would say it's worth it. I mean, if you discover that you were only the maximum KVA you were using was 30, well then you would never bring it right down. You'd always leave a bit of an allowance. And also it's something you really need to think very carefully and get expert advice. I just think it is an opportunity in some cases that your people can be paying a lot of money needlessly. Now, mind you, the PSO that's being reimbursed or will be reimbursed next year is based on the KVA. So you'd actually do better in terms of reimbursement next year if you have a higher KVA. So it swings and roundabouts. And I suppose maybe just in terms, just maybe we could finish up if there aren't any questions with just the whole idea of energy security or electricity security is such a big topic at the moment, and people are obviously very concerned about it. And those electricity prices, unfortunately, will continue to rise. That is based at the moment on the fact that the default rate is the highest rate in the market. That was originally to protect renewable energy investors. But at the moment, the highest rate, because of the war in the Ukraine largely, is gas. So even though renewable energy being generated by wind turbines and so on doesn't need to cost that much, it comes in at that price as well. So everything is benchmarked against that gas price. That is why the rates are so high. And I was talking to somebody very high up in Airgrid yesterday, and I suppose one of the key things they said is, as society at large, community, if there's one thing we can do, and that's anything you can do to move your electricity usage out of that 5 to 7, that critical window between 5 and 7 p.m. That is the tricky part. He said there were no certainties about whether there would be blackouts. Basically, if the wind blows for the next 4 months, we'll be fine. And if it doesn't, it'll be tricky. So anything, I mean, even places like Finland, so a lot of mainland Europe is more dependent on that gas that's coming from Russia, that kind of European gas. We're actually connected to the UK, by the UK to Norway. And so we don't have quite that level of dependency that other parts of mainland Europe do. But anything you can do to reduce your electricity usage in whatever way. In Finland, they're moving production to after 7 o'clock in the evening in some industries, just to spread out that electricity load. So if you want to do something to help, you know, eat in the middle of the day and don't turn your oven on at 5 o'clock in the evening. I jest, but you know, simple things like that would be worth considering. If we all put our minds to that, I suppose we all have a role to play. So, any questions from anybody else?
Sorry, Catríona, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Just on that, I might have missed it, but I'm assuming those potential shortages there for a domestic setting, we're not looking, or is it, I'm assuming
it's actually the other way around. Yeah, it's the other way around. So the last sector that will lose electricity will be the domestic sector. The first will be, so some of those big industries that have already been warned that they will need to be prepared to, you know, so the data centers, the big industry, they are the ones that will be targeted first. They're the big users. The very last, certain institutions will be protected. So obviously hospitals, schools and places like that. But apart from those protected organizations, the last thing the state is going to want is blackouts in a residential setting. And I think if they do happen, you'll be warned. It's not as if you'll be sitting there and the lights suddenly go off. I think it's unlikely, but it's possible. But the more everybody does to try and prevent that we can play a role, you know, if society in general makes that effort.
It's great.
So,
Keeps you back to the I think we would be fairly far down the food chain though, because we're a bit of an under the radar industry.
Yes.
Not massive. It seems like we're massive users to us because we're paying the bills, but we aren't actually massive users. So I don't think that we would need to worry unduly, but it's very hard to tell.
It's just uncertain.
And potentially the kind of the pressure point would be that 5 to 7 p.m. period.
Exactly. So I mean, if you think about most theatres, you might tech a little bit. So a good example would be, can you do your lighting check earlier, before 5 o'clock, break from 5 to 7, come back at 7, you know, to open the house and so on. But if you can make that break happen between 5 and 7, that in itself is facilitating, you know, taking the pressure off the grid at that time. So that's a really good example of how the theatre sector can do something about it. And then obviously the theatre sector's heaviest use is really going to be kind of 7:30 to 10, that kind of time. So in that sense, you know, we're not the ones that are going to be targeted as such. But so this person in Airgrid who's very high, they just don't know. But he said if the wind blows, great. And if it doesn't, that's just definitely going to be a little bit trickier. He went into a lot of detail about why this has happened and how they're trying to source alternative additional backup generation, but there's been a lot of complications. It's a very, very complicated sector trying to make that happen. And some of the promises that were made have not come through. And therefore, you know, the Airgrid has obviously known this is going to happen. Anybody who's interested, I'll see if I can find it and paste it, but there is a website, the Airgrid dashboard. I'm just going to have a look for it now. And it shows you at any moment in time how much electricity is being generated and how much electricity the country is using. So I'm just going to paste that in. I find it a fascinating one to check every now and then, especially when the wind is blowing. It's nice to see that electricity being generated, but you can also see the shortfall and where we are in terms of the actual amount that we need to keep the country afloat. I suppose in some of the ways that we might try and tackle our usage, hopefully that will feed into tackling our emissions as well, because the less electricity we use, the less energy we use, the less emissions we're producing. All righty. Everybody good with that? Okay, well, listen, thank you. You're a silent bunch, but I hope you've got something out of that. Silent and invisible. Hopefully that's been useful to you. And we've recorded it. We can make it available if there's anybody that you know who might be useful. If I powered it through the how to read your electricity bill too fast, you'll have an opportunity to go back and, you know, see it a second time around, which is a bit like watching your favorite film on repeat. But if you have any questions, do feel free to get Catríona@greenarts.ie is me, and of course Irma and Anna and Katie in Theatre Forum. But thank you all very much for coming. I appreciate it. I know how busy you all are, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Many thanks.
Thank you.